Welcome to One Wire Boards channel. This is part 2 of the One Wire home monitoring demonstration. What we want to cover today, so in part 1 we covered this site and kind of explained everything and took you through some of the links and explained a lot about the 8 temperatures being monitored here and the delta T and all this kind of thing. But today I want to go and kind of show you what's going on in the back, going on the web server, or going on in the code, behind the code. Now, one thing you can do, I don't think I brought this up in part 1, but you can go and look at the code, the HTML code, but what you're not going to see is you're not going to see the programming code, because the programming code sits on the server and it executes on the server. And when it's executed, it produces HTML. And so you're never going to see, just by looking at the code, you're never going to see what the server, what the work the server's doing with programming languages and the code blocks and everything. But I do have, in HTML commenting, I do have kind of information on some of the things I've done over time, and so you can see this if you look at the view source command. Okay, but what I want to show you actually is what's going on behind the scenes. And to do that, let's go back to here, and let's go to here. So as you can see, now this is the real code of the server. It ends in ASPX, which means it's a Microsoft .NET ASPX page, .ASPX page. And so as you can see, this is exactly what you saw on the website when you view source, but you didn't see this. You didn't see these code blocks because they're hidden by the server and they're executed. The code blocks are executed by the server, and it doesn't produce anything. It produces results, but the results it produces will be related to HTML. So, but yeah, so this is, so obviously this is a Visual Basic application on the web, so I use code blocks, and I insert the code blocks between these little yellow symbols here. I insert code blocks where I want to go execute stuff, like pull records out of the database and then run through a loop and show them on the website, things like that. These are some of the commands, just the import namespace commands you got to have in order for the thing to work. The server has to know what language your code's going to be in, so you want to tell the page language. Obviously, this is client, system data client. That's the SQL client. That tells it, that gives it information it needs to access Microsoft SQL Server, which we do. This particular script block. Okay, now here's a script block. So this is another method of executing on the server and not showing it. So you don't see anything in the script block, but it's running on the server, and it's resident while this page is alive. Okay, so what this is pretty cool. It's called get dataset. So what this does is I pass it a query string for the database, which is basically a string of commands requesting the data I want to pull out of the database. And then what kind of query is it? Is it a select query, or is it a insert query? And I basically call them query and non-query, basically, because there's two types of queries, right? I mean, there's lots of query types, but there's two basic types of queries. One, you're requesting data out of the database, and that's it. All you're doing, you're reading data out of the database, and that's it. Two, you're inserting something into the database. Okay, you're actually taking some readings, anything, whatever it is, and you're putting it into the database, so you can later read it out of the database, or somebody else can read it out of the database, or whatever. Anyway, so that's what this command does. Obviously, these are the commands for SQL connect, query string. So query string, constring is the embedded information that tells it what the name of the database is, how to access the database, what tables, what table in the database are you pulling records from, and like what's the password to get into the database. All these things that you need to know, and that's stored in a configuration file. We'll take a look at configuration files here in a second. So it's not stored here. It's not stored anywhere in this example. It's stored in another file. And so this file has to go to the other file to get the information it needs on the database, how to access the database. But anyway, this is just, it's running, so it's taking the query that I provided in the command line up here, and it's running all that, and it's returning it in a data set. Okay, so what's a data set? Well, a data set is an XML file that has a whole bunch of data in it. And I mean, that's it. It's just it has formatted data that then I can go access in my program. So anyway, this is a real useful function, because the only, if you didn't do this, if you didn't have this to go read, then you would have to go produce this code every time you wanted to access the database, and you don't want to do that. You just want to call something and say, hey, here's the information you need, go get me these records. And that's what this does. This is all just standard HTML. This is, you see this when you do a view source from the website. You can see all this stuff. All right, so here's my first body tag. Here's my first code tag, code block. Obviously, I'm defining the version. I'm setting up some variables here. The important one here is dsselect. So dsselect is a data set. It's saying set up a variable, just like a string, just like a date, just like an integer. It's a variable that's going to hold all the results of the returned query. Okay. Here I'm running a query select top one. So this goes and it says, tell me what the date is of the oldest record in the database, temperature record. Tell me how many records are in the database. This is another select count. Okay, and then I run it through the get data set that I showed you up above. Here's where I'm actually running select queries to go get all the temperatures that I want to display on the page for this instance. And I'm adding, this is, if you're wondering why I'm doing a date add here, this database is in LA somewhere, or Los Angeles. It's in the Pacific time zone. I don't know where it is. It's in the Pacific time zone somewhere. It's on the West Coast. So that means the date in the the date on the server is 2 hours earlier than where I am. I'm in Texas. Okay, I'm in Central time zone. So if I want the data to be representative of my time zone, I have to add 2 hours to that data, because otherwise it's going to come back Pacific time. So you know, that's the kind of issues you have to deal with when you're dealing with servers in different time zones across the country, and you're pulling data and you're saving data. I mean, it's really, you got to really dig into it and understand time zones. Time zones have to be dealt with. So okay, so I'm running the query. Here's where I run the query and say, okay, take this query and go run it through the database, through my data set, get data set command up above, dump all that information into dsselect, and says, okay, it's there. And here I'm pulling the information out. So here's dsselect table 0. If as long as I'm running one query, it's going to be table 0. If I'm running multiple queries, it could be table 0, table 1, table 2, so forth and so on. And then I happen to know that it's in the very first record is the name I'm looking for, and then this is the day of the week. Let's see. So if I go scroll down, okay. So here's where I'm looping through the data. For int loop equals 0 to data select. So this is saying loop through the data starting at integer 0, because arrays, it's all an array of information, and arrays start at 0. They don't start at 1. So start at 0 and count through all the records, which there'll be 8 records, but I don't want to count from 0 to 8. I want to count from 0 to 7. So I have to subtract 1 from this count. So it's 7. So it's counting from 0 to 7. And then I'm using int loop to go pull the record. So here you can see, here I'm formatting a number, I'm formatting a temperature. This is the current temperature. and I'm using the rows int loop. Okay, so int loop, the first time through, this is int loop is 0. So here, this is going to be row 0, row 0, row 0, row 0, row 0. The second time, it's going to be row 1, row 1, row 1. Oh, third time, it's going to be row 2, row 2, row 2. And so it's going through all the data um, by row. Okay, and this response write command is displaying everything on the web page. And of course, I'm using HTML tags. So here I'm doing a response write that says go get in, go send this stuff to the web page and have it displayed. And obviously, HTML tags aren't going to be displayed. The HTML tag is going to format the data according to what you want. So according to the size and everything. Here, this is where the second part, another loop statement. This is where I'm doing the delta T conversion. So I'm determining the delta T temperature, which is basically the plenum temperature. Okay, the plenum is the air conditioning. It's where the air conditioning, the evaporator sends. Once it goes through the evaporator and the air is chilled down, it goes into a plenum, and the plenum then goes to pipes that go to different rooms in the house, right, for the vents. And so the plenum's got this cold temperature. So it takes the plenum temperature minus the house temperature at the thermostat. And you end up with a negative number. If everything's working like it's supposed to, you end up with a negative number, minus 20 degrees or whatever like that. So this is where it's calculating all that. And the rest is really here. I'm using way back up in the very top of this. I said I'm going to get record counts and things like that, and what's the oldest record, and this is where I'm using it. See, so this is HTML, and then I'm inserting a tag. I'm inserting a code block, a really small one, just to display how many records are in the database. That I ran way up at the top up here. I ran that. It was one of the first queries I ran that I showed you. But that's it. That's it. Now let's take a look real quick at something else. Where is it? It's way up here. Yeah. So the information I need to access the database is not in this code anywhere. It's in another file called a web config, and this command right here goes and gets that information from the web config. Web configs are very, very common in a web application, in a web application, in a desktop type application on a computer. They're called app configs, and then different programming languages call them different things, but basically it's a configuration file. And let's take a look at the configuration file. A lot of stuff in here, a lot of stuff defining what version of .NET you're using, but right here, app settings, this is where I'm defining the database. And as you can see, I'm commenting out the first one because this is my home computer database, which nobody can access but me. And then this is my actual connection string that I'm using on the cloud, and I have it X'd out, because if I had it for real and I left it in there by accident, you could actually take that information and go access my database. But like I said, and so the whole purpose of a configuration file is to store static data. So you don't want to store, well, to store mostly static data. And okay, so let's just take an example. So if you have something in the database and you want it to wait 10 seconds, I'm sorry, in the web application, you want it to wait 10 seconds before it does something, and you put that into the code, into the actual code, then that's called hard coding. You're hard coding some of your parameters. And let's say you want to change it to 6 seconds. Well, now you have to go back to the code and change it in the code to 6 seconds. While if you take that out of the code and you put that variable into a configuration file, you don't have to touch the code. You actually go to the configuration file and you make your change. So that's what's important about configuration files. I mean, I can show you examples of configuration files that I have Um, Probably in another video, but I got all kinds of stuff in there. You know, web addresses. You know, delays. Do I want verbose error checking or not? Yes or no? I mean, and I can simply turn stuff on and turn stuff off by making changes in the configuration file. I don't touch the code, and that's the whole purpose. Because anytime you touch code, you can screw something up. So you don't want to touch the code. Um, let's take a look at one more thing. So this is basically right everything that's going on behind the scenes, under the hood, whatever you want to call it. But let me show you one slide that I think is important. This is the architecture of my OneWire site, and it's called a dynamic website architecture. And this is pretty common. So my website that I showed you, um, this this has nothing to do with the sensors. All this site is doing is it's pulling information out of a database. And that's it. That's it. It doesn't say go get temperature readings at the sensors or anything like that. It has this site has no clue. So what does get the temperature out of the database? Well, if you take a look at this, um, you have my like all these sensors I have are at my house. Okay, the attic and everywhere. And they're DS18S20 sensors. So what I have at my house is I have a Windows computer that's running software, and it happens to be a Windows service. We're gonna look more into that in the next video, but it's running a Windows service, and that Windows service every minute goes and gets these temperatures, and it takes the results of that reading those temperatures, and it sticks it into the database in the cloud. Okay, that's all this, and that's all it does. Then the web application that we've just reviewed and looked under the hood and kind of the code and what I'm doing in the web application, all it's doing is going and requesting information from the database. Okay, absolutely nothing to do with any of this. And so this is really important. This is really standard architecture. I mean, I don't care what you're doing. I don't care what it is in a web application. Web applications, all they do is they go to a database and get information and show it to you. And that's it. There's something else going on behind the scenes that you can't see and you don't know, where it's and something else is running and it's putting stuff into the database. Um, like I said, this is and it's really not any different in a Mac or you know, Linux, Ubuntu, Red Hat, so on. I mean, I am a Windows guy, but um, it's basically all the same. If you know how one works, you're going to know how they all work. But anyway, so I hope this has been useful. I'm going to cover the back end stuff, the Windows services that's running. It's running a Windows service. It's running a web service. I mean, to get this information from here to here. Well, to get this information of the sensors is a Windows service. To get this information from the computer into the database that's a cloud, that's a web service. And so there's a lot of stuff that's going on behind the scenes that I'm going to cover in my next video. I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions or comments, I mean, feel free. I'm going to read all the comments and you know, and answer questions if I can. So, you know, let me know what you think, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you.